From Studio A at the USC Annenberg School, this is Sophie Sullivan, your host of the Paradigm Podcast. Today I'm in conversation with Benny Forer. He is a deputy district attorney with the Los Angeles office. He's also an adjunct lecturer in the information technology program here at USC. He's a father of 5, an ordained rabbi, and an amateur sushi chef on his Friday nights. Please join me in welcoming Benny Forer.
Voice. Let's do mouth exercises.
To sit in solemn silence on a dull, dark dock. Do you know that one?
No, that's awesome.
It's a Shakespeare. In a pestilential prison with a lifelong lock, awaiting the sensation of a short, sharp shock from a cheap and chippy chopper on a big black block.
And you're wasting this on journalism.
What?
Nothing.
No, it's actually I get to do it before my shows because I'm a TV anchor.
Right. So
it's all coming together.
What Shakespeare is it?
That is not Shakespeare.
Oh. I memorized the first page and a half of Macbeth when I was in high school, and I can mostly still recite it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was
Can
weird.
you proof?
Where shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. That will be ere the set of sun. We're the place upon the heath. They were to meet with Macbeth. Something, I forget.
Something. So do you have a good memory as a lawyer?
Not anymore. I used to.
What happened?
Law school.
Law school.
Destroys your memory.
Tell me more.
Well, because you have to, you over-exercise the muscle, I think's what happened. So there's so much data I had to compress into my brain, because everything's like closed book, and that you had to also be able to dump it quickly, and I think that's what happened. That, lack of sleep, kids, age. It's a combination. Yeah.
I mean, did you like it?
Law school or kids? Which one?
Let's try law school first.
Law school, yeah, I loved law school. It was hell, but I loved law school. I really did. I enjoyed learning, so I really enjoyed being in law school. I enjoyed the experience, but like the psycho pressure that I put on myself, and partially that has to do with going to the law school that I did. I think there are people who go to better law schools who don't feel that sort of pressure. I found it fascinating. Me and my friends, we'd put like an insane amount of pressure. There was like no option of not doing well, and so it was like insanity. And so those like pre-exams, the other feeling like being a student, this constant, I haven't studied enough, I constantly have something to do, is horrendous, right? That's like the best part about not being in school, is I don't feel this constant pressure. Oh my God, like if I'm hanging out with my buddies, I have to do something more. Oh, I should be studying, right? I hated that. But I loved learning. I enjoyed a lot of law school. Had good friends, had some really great professors, some really awful ones, but it was great.
Right. I kind of wanted to talk about that idea of learning. That's something that, I feel like was one of the most important things that I learned from you, is how it feels to love learning.
Right.
That wasn't a compliment. But that's something that I feel like most students who go through your class really understand, is that what's so attractive about you as a professor is that you're not really a professor. You're a lawyer. You're a guy who just likes to be there, be in the thick of education. Has that always been with you? Yeah,
I think I've always liked learning. It was kind of interesting. One of the things I've done, and I didn't realize this, it wasn't intentional. I always wrote. Like, it's really bizarre. Like, and I never started out as a writer. I never thought I was a writer. I never considered myself a writer. I don't think, a very good writer in many ways. But, like, I always wrote. It was really weird. So I went to rabbinical school before. And in rabbinical school, I wrote. Like, I have stuff I wrote. I try to read it. I don't understand a word. Like, that memory's gone. But, like, I've always written. So I've published in my career, I'd say several major things. And many minor things, but several really major things. And I think that came from that, which was just this love of learning. And then how are you going to learn? Active learning. In my mind, I actively learn. So if I'm reading, like I always regret certain times, like I listen to podcasts on the subway, and I don't like that I don't take notes, but I'm never going to take notes, right? Because it's not something I'm going to sit down on the subway and take notes like that, or reading on the weekends, I'm not taking notes. But like when I read legal stuff, I always take notes. And so that's active, right? It helps me digest the information and try to formulate it in a better way. And that ultimately results in me writing. It's kind of like that. It wasn't like I set out, let me write something. It's more like, hey, there's so much cool information. Let me put it down on a piece of paper. Well, how do I figure this thing out? Let me research that, write that. And then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, I wrote something. It's kind of how it works.
Do you feel teaching is a way of doing that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was a good teacher in my early days when I first started here. I think I knew the material well when I first started here, but I always hated this thing though. Teachers always go, "I learn more from you than you learn from me." Okay, I always found that was bullshit. I as a teacher now, I think that's still bullshit. I teach you more than you teach me. I mean that, but it's not the teaching of materials, right? It's the allowance to how do I present material better to my students, and that creates more motivation or more, outlining or more ideas within my mind of how I'm going to present it to you and how I'm going to give it over. So it makes you a better teacher, the practice and the care. Right? There's a lot of teachers who are very, I think, academic or intellectual and writing and doing all these things, but there's no care to give that information over in any proper way, and so they lose out on that like learning from their students kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm certainly far more advanced in the sense of the depth of the information that I have now and how I give it over, in the past 10 years. So there is that, and I love that. It's a great process. Every time I'm like I'm rewriting parts of my book now, right? And I'm looking at, like, I have class night, and I'm like, shit, I have this stuff I forgot to put in my new slides, right? And that's a process. Okay, how am I going to give that new information over? So that happens.
Right. Your teaching philosophy is something that I wanted to get into, and I want to note that it's interesting because you're teaching a law class in the School of Engineering, right? Privacy and cyber law to a bunch of kids who are cybersecurity majors, who are military majors, who really maybe have not written 20 pages before, or have not written anything at this length. There's no charts. It's just all textbook heavy court cases. How do you tackle that? How do you get kids who are interested in engineering to actually care about reading the dissenting arguments of child protection laws?
Yeah, so that's a really cool question because, like you said, I think I'm a practitioner and then an academic as opposed to an academic, right? You have people who have pursued an academic sort of career their whole lives, and I always found them bewildering, right? When I went to schools, college, law school, rabbinical school, I found that there were so many people like that who were just academics who didn't really care about them. The teaching was secondary to their existence, right? Like everything else was more important. And I have the exact. So one of the things I was like, I don't want to be like that, right? That's a conscious choice. I don't want to be that professor who doesn't care about his material or his students. I think that's really important. The second thing is I think law is fascinating for everybody. You don't see people sitting around tables, kitchen tables, or dining room tables, having discussions about medical stuff until COVID, and then got super weird. But like people didn't do that, right? They don't talk about architecture. They don't talk about. I mean, there are sects of people who might do that, right? But that's not a common, universal conversation. Law is a universal conversation because we're all impacted by it, and it's all the things in the news constantly. Every single thing has a legal aspect to it. So it is naturally interesting, I think. And if you can present it in a way that people who don't have any experience with it, but how it could apply to them in either their day-to-day life or their professional career, it becomes fascinating for them, as long as you give it over in a compelling way and you think about it in a compelling way. So I have colleagues I know who teach in other schools. And I see the way they teach, and I think it's horrible. I mean, I don't want to criticize people on record, but like some of it, it's like they go in totally unprepared. They believe they know what they know, and they go in and they teach whatever materials from a book. And as opposed to me looking at materials, going, what type of material do I want to teach, and what method, and how am I going to get over? Like, how do I get my kids to digest this? I can't just jump into cyber issues. And that's kind of how my class goes, right? Like, how am I going to get my students to digest this? So I think a lot about that. So that's where my beginning point. I don't want to be like those people. I want my students to, it's not about me, right? I mean, it's about the students gaining knowledge so they can go on and move on in life. The least significant part of that, I recognize that. So I think that's really important. Too many of us think we're important, right? Like, for example, some of the stuff that drives me nuts is unnecessary deadlines. Right, like deadlines I get, and very important for many classes and certain things, but flexibility within that is necessary. We are dealing with young adults, and we give young adults or teenagers, we give them so many benefits. Like in criminal justice, I work in criminal justice, we're like, he murdered somebody, but he was young, and then you go, yeah, but he missed his deadline by 3 minutes, I'm giving him an F. You're like, where's the consistency in how we treat children, right, or young adults? And so I think a lot about that, like. And I think to myself, like, okay, when a deadline is absolutely necessary, of course, but there needs to be flexibility within that to take into account so many different things young adults are going through. And so I really try to think about that as well, and really try to work with my students, because my goal is to make them better people, better employees, better whatever it is that they're going to go on to in life. It's not about me. right? So if I were to set a deadline because it's about me, then it helps them nothing.
Right. And that's what's interesting is you're coming to a very academic setting from a very holistic standpoint. That's what you've explored with law is you're actually working with people, understanding, how did you get here? What circumstances in life have you led you to this point where now you are committing this crime? Now you really have no other choice but to do this in your life. I want to get just into a little bit more background.
Okay.
A little bit into your practice. After, you graduated, you did a few other jobs that are less important now. You started at the DA's office, and you were mostly doing kind of other kinds of prosecutions, murders, a variety of things.
Yeah, we start off as rookies. They put you in misdemeanors, or what's called preliminary hearings. So you're doing lower level stuff, or less risk stuff, so to speak. Risk, I mean, for society. And then when you develop, you get put into other units.
All right. Is that when you joined the Cybercrimes Division?
No, so 2006, I joined the DA's office, was in misdemeanors in Downey, Bellflower, got sent downtown for 6 months to do prelims, then got to Central Trial. I don't know if any of these words mean anything. Central Trials, which is like downtown trials for younger DAs, where I had a range of cases from dope cases to murders. So I was a DA for 2 years. I was already handling multiple murder cases. That's a tragedy of several things. One is, in a way, of the office, right? Like that young DA should be handling such serious cases, but it's not their fault. We're thrown into the fire. It's a tragedy of society. There are so many murders that you have to give your young DAs murders. It's not like there's a few and you have these experienced murder prosecutors and they do it. It's like everybody I know has a murder case. Like it's in my office, it's not a big deal or a big accomplishment to do a murder trial. Everybody's done one. That's how unfortunately common it is. So you went there, and then they send you to juvie, so you get sent around a lot, and then eventually I went to cyber.
I want to ask you, not a lot of people actually get to hear from a district attorney what it's like. Do you remember what it was like being a young DA, the first murder case that you worked on?
Yeah.
What was it like?
The first murder case? That was awesome. Are you kidding me? First murder case, okay. Am I allowed to ramble?
Please do.
Okay. So I was a young DA, went through some stuff in the office. That's besides the point. I persevered. But I'm a young DA. I'm in Central Trials downtown. And I had a boss, not my boss, but like immediate supervisor who was, in my opinion, very lazy. And so when I got sent upstairs we call it upstairs because it's literally upstairs, to the Central Trials, I come in, I'm this young, eager, I've been a DA for, 12, 13, 14 months at this point. And I'm in felonies now. It's huge, right? And I come in and I'm like, where am I going to sit? Where's my office going to be? Who am I going to share an office with? What kind of cases? And things start me up. And this lazy guy just walks down the hall looking for space. Like, that's how well prepared they were for me. And he's just like, he sees an office and there's a stack of cases, piles of cases and folders. And he goes, why don't you take this office, sit there, and start working on those cases? And he walks out. And I had kind of a meltdown. Like, you can't handle 40 cases that are at every stage of the proceedings, right? You kind of got to build up. Maybe give me a case that's set for trial in a few days and I can prep that up. But you have other cases that are just got filed, whatever. But this guy was totally lazy. He didn't go through these files. He just handed me stacks of files that a senior DA had left behind because they got transferred out. And so I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? I still remember my buddy Tiffany, who's no longer a DA, but wonderful woman. I was like like having a panic breakdown. And she comes to my office, she grabbed those huge calendars, wall calendars, and she goes, okay, let's just map it out first. Right, that's the first step. And started putting all the dates of everything on it. So the first few months were hectic. What ended up happening, though, because he was lazy, is that I was handling these extremely serious cases. And I got to handle extremely serious trials. Now, most young DAs are starting off, they're doing a dope possession, a dope sales at the time, felonies. And you'd start off on that. You get a few cases under your belt. You start getting a few more serious cases. Maybe get an assault case with a knife, threats. I'm handling cases. My third trial I do is an attempted murder, attempted carjacking, and my victim was shot 4 times and lived. Okay, like a crazy case. And the boss, it's called the head deputy, my head deputy of my unit, he didn't know that his assistant was lazy. So he all of a sudden I'm this boss. I walk in back-to-back convictions on heavy cases. And I walk in, and I'm pretty sure we had a team like outing at a bar that evening. And I walk in, I just got a guilty on this attempted murder shooting case where a guy got shot 4 times and the jury came back guilty, right, on everything. And everybody's like congratulating me on this win. And I think he was like, this dude's a beast, right? But I wasn't. I was just a guy in the right place. And so the next day I walk in my office and on my desk is a murder file. It says, because PC, Penal Code Section 187 is murder in California. And I looked down and I was like, this is nuts. I've been a DA for 14 months, like 15 months. You can't give me a murder. That's insane. So I opened up the case, and it was like this thin, right? The discovery and the information comes later, but it was just the charges and some initial police reports. I opened up the case, and it's a special circumstance murder. What that means is it's eligible for the death penalty. Okay. According to official policy, you have to be a level 4 DA to do those cases. I was a level 2. I'm still not a level 4. I was like, I shouldn't be handling this, right? Like, I think that's a mistake. I figured my boss, who was lazy, dropped on my desk, but he didn't realize what it was. Swear to God, walked in his office and handed it back to him. I was like, I think you made a mistake. And he's like, no, Mike, the supervisor, signed that to you. And I was like, for real? It's like, yeah. I was like, all right. That was my first murder case. So it was a fascinating case. Not fascinating, it sucks. It was tragedy, but it was a case involving a young Hispanic man walking down the street. He had no family. He was undocumented. He was walking down the street, and the defendant chose to rob him. Walks up to him at knife point, tries to rob him. The Hispanic guy tries to get away, stabs him in the back. The blade snaps off. That's how hard and deep he stabbed him. Blade snaps off, and he drops the handle, thank God, and he grabs the guy's satchel and runs away. There was a witness who was driving by in an Astro van. You know what an Astro van is?
No.
Creepy ass vans. You know the vans that have no motor in the front? They're just straight down?
No. Oh.
Yeah, it's a van.
Yes.
You're like sitting in the windshield's right in front of you, and there's not just headlights right in front, like one of those vans.
Oh, God.
Creepy vans. But he's a young man, a Hispanic guy, and he sees this. I'm going to skip ahead. He testifies at the preliminary hearing that we do. And when he testifies, I go, I'm trying to get ID. Like, how close did you get? Like, did you make ID? Yeah, is that the guy? Yeah. How close did you get to him? Like, were you like just driving by, you saw him in passing and it was some random dude? Or did you actually see the guy? Is what I'm trying to ask. I didn't know this. And he goes, oh, I was inches away from him when I saw him. And I was like, what do you mean by inches? Like, you were in a van. He goes, yeah, I was trying to run him over. And I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I just saw him commit a murder. I turned my van and I was going to run him over, but there was like a stone fence or stone barrier of another plaza, and he jumped over that and ran away. How cool, right? I was like, you're a hero, man. That's awesome. And so that was my first murder case. And we ended up, from the knife handle, we got his DNA. His girlfriend, who we interviewed because he was in prison now. We solved it a few years later off the DNA. And he's in prison for robbery, and he was with his girlfriend at the time he committed this robbery. Murder detectives went to interview his girlfriend. His girlfriend placed him at scene. They were very good in their interview. Placed him at the scene. You remember this incident? You know, there's the helicopters. I don't know what happened. We were at a gas station. We ran out of money. He told me, I'll be back. I'm going to get some money and we can fill up the car with gas. And he came back and we drove away. I remember that clearly. So we have that. We have his DNA. We have a witness who IDs him. We have his girlfriend placing him at a scene. And then the detectives went to state prison, and they were very good in their interview. They kind of, I hate the word manipulate, because they did detective work, which was they never told him what they were there for, really. They let him sort of get himself into trouble. Like, they were like, hey, we have this robbery on our desk. We're trying to clear it out. It happened a long time ago. You're in prison for robbery. Can we talk about this? And they led him down this path slowly but surely until he admitted, oh, yeah, I was there with my girlfriend. Yeah, I think I went out, and until they, told him, hey, you murdered a guy. And in his defense, I really do believe he didn't realize he murdered the guy, because it was so fast. He just stabbed and ran. He never knew that. It was on the news. It's another murder in L.A. So he never knew. So when he found that out, it was shocking to him, and his reaction was real.
Wow.
So yeah, that was my case. So he got life in prison without parole.
Your first murder case.
Yeah, we didn't seek death penalty.
Right. Okay. That's a big case to
Yeah, it
start
was
off
great.
on.
Yeah, it
You're
was
14 months old as a DA.
Yeah. I mean, the case took another year to get to trial, a year and a half to get to trial. But yeah, that was like handed to me, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome.
And now you've got 20 years-ish
18,
under your belt. 18.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you experienced crazier things?
Yeah. You always experience crazy things. That's the nature of the DA's office. It's all crazy.
I mean, that's, to me, as somebody who moved to Los Angeles, right, I feel like the law cases that I look into, the people that I talk to, it's another way of learning how this city works, right? These are interesting people that you're meeting with. I mean,
no,
all
that's
different lives.
an understatement. This is terrible. This is not, well, I'm saying, right, it's not. It shouldn't be working this way. It's horrifying. Like, the day-to-day work that we do. Like, I always joke, we have a dark sense of humor. I was like, we deal in human suffering. Like, that's what we work with. It's horrible half the time. I mean, you say, we don't live with that. You have to build up a a certain amount of jadedness and dark humor to it, and perspective. But you're dealing every day with just absolute tragedy. And often you feel hampered by your inability to help out people. That's the real negative of the job. I mean, the job is amazing. I love the job. I love doing what I do. But the negative of the job is when you can't. A quick example, just on a very minor compared to what I used to deal with. I'm in mental health court right now. I have a father comes in. He's a professor emeritus at LMU University, taught there for years, right? And he has a kid who he adopted. I found this out from the dad this morning. He adopted a kid at 5 years old. The kids, both his parents were a Russian kid. Both his parents were killed. And he adopts this kid, and his wife dies 5 years later. So the kid's been abandoned multiple times. Of course, the kid turns to drugs. He's a drug addict. This professor spent thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars putting him through rehabs. The kid's been committing crimes lately. And now he's in the mental health court, and the professor comes to court, and he's like, I'm begging you. Like, I don't want my son to die. Right? Like, he's been to rehab. That's not what helps him. He's been in jail for days. That's not what helps him. I need him here. Right? I need him in the mental health system so that he can receive that sort of mental health treatment. Weaning off the drug. He goes, I've brought him to rehabs. He's gotten off drugs, and then he'll go back. 2 months later, he's back on drugs. He needs to be, or he's going to be dead. And, the difficulty of that's terrible. And what's the legal basis for me to hold him? Right? And I turned to public defender. I was like, hey, this is the dad. This is what he told me. And the public defender was like, well, if he only has a drug issue and not a mental health issue, we're going to send him back. And you go, right, that doesn't help anybody. But it's off my desk, right? Like, so it is human suffering, right? The dad's suffering, the kid's suffering. And you go sit there and go, can I do anything about this? Like, I'd love to give this kid services. I hope I can. So you're going, I hope this kid's mentally ill? Like, I don't know what you say about that, right? But that's kind of like, and that's a small story of the sort of human suffering you have to deal with every day. But again, you have to build up a certain jadedness, and you have to always realize, like, the sort of work that you're doing, regardless of social perspectives on you or your job or your career or whatever, you got to do it. Right? Like, I turned to my wife the other day and I was like, I'm so fed up. I'm just going to mail it in. She goes, you're not allowed to do that. I was like, what do you mean? She goes, you're helping people. You can't just mail it in. Okay, so it was in a moment of weakness, but she's right.
Yeah. I mean, how do you deal with this?
You build up. You build up a certain amount. Listen, there's great results where you really do help people out and do the right thing. And those are great. And those happen more than the bad. Okay, so there is that. Being a lawyer is extremes, ups and downs anyway. And you're going to have that in the office. Hopefully you have good colleagues around you, good supporting people. And you also have to, as you get older, you're able to be more holistic generally, as opposed to when you're younger, you're just outraged about injustice or whatever. Right? Like, same thing. It's like you see DAs, like, who will celebrate a win, and you're like, ooh, calm down, right? Like, sometimes I've said that, like, no, it's okay, you won, and it's a big deal, and and the fact that you won and you achieve justice for a victim, but by the same token, like, there's a human life at stake here as well, right? There's a tragedy that happened, so kind of have to take a step back. But when you're younger, you're more like that. When you get older, you start to, I think, hopefully, be more relaxed.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something that I think is one of the most interesting parts of you, is that, you've been a DA for 18 years now. You've been a lecturer for 12 years. You're also a rabbi.
Yes.
You started in a rabbinical school.
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit more about how you got into this.
So I grew up in a system like that, like an Orthodox Jewish system, where in our culture we're insular. We've been forced insular for thousands of years, and now we're voluntarily insular, but we are insular, and there's a strong benefit to that. There really, really is. But that's not the point of the story. But it really is. And so you grow up insular in the sense that you go to your schools, you go to things. That is part of the trajectory. You finish high school, you go to rabbinical school. That's just how it is. So, like, my graduating high school class, 25 guys, we graduated here. I actually came to high school here in LA. So I graduated from a school here in Los Angeles, a Jewish school. 25, I think like 23 of us went to rabbinical school. And I think out of my class, only a handful of us even went to college. There's 3 of us who are lawyers, 3 or maybe 4 who are lawyers, and one guy's a doctor, and one guy went to college for like business, and that was it. So advanced degrees, probably 3 or 4 of us, and the other guys are all more successful. They're smart, they're capable, because you're in an environment of pure intellectualism your whole life. And so after I finished high school, you went to rabbinical school for 4 years. That's just how it is. And I like studying. I always knew that, like, I could leave. And so there were people who just hung around, right? Sometimes there's just people hang. I always knew like I like learning, so it was like if I'm going to be here, I might as well learn. Sort of attitude in life. And then I finished rabbinical school, and there would have been another year studying for my like bar, my rabbinical ordination. I could have gone to another school and I was like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm going to college now. I'm ready to go to college. And I jumped straight into 4 years of college directly. So 4 years of rabbinical school, then 4 years of college. And then directly into law school, 3 years of law school. So that was 11 years back to back to back. Finished law school. I'm now a lawyer. I'm practicing as DA. And I was like, I had a group of friends, living here nearby. And I was like, we all went to rabbinical school. None of us pursued that final thing because it would have been an extra year minimum. And I said, let's do it. So we're like, yeah. So we arranged with a local rabbi or synagogue and another rabbi who's an ordained person who can give ordination, whatever that means. And we learned for 4 or 5 years with this guy. We did much slower than the 1 year, right? But we learned for 4 or 5 years. We learned sections. We'd get tested. And after that, they were like, all right, you're now ordained. And so I have a certificate. It's the only certificate on my office wall.
Your
ordainment. I don't have my law degree. I don't have any of my other achievements, whatever it is. I just have my rabbinical ordination. It's just a document-sized thing. And my sainthood. I've been sainted by the Universal Life Church. That's a whole joke thing. If you know what the Universal Life Church is, Google it. And it's awesome. But my friend bought me sainthood. And that's on my wall. It says Benny for Saint.
I did not know
Costs
that.
$40.
I'm going to have to add that in the YouTube description.
So that's on my wall. That's it.
Okay, so I know it's been a community that you've been in your whole life. I mean, what does it mean you balance this in addition to your other lives?
I don't practice as a rabbi.
You don't practice?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's knowledge. So I just have the ordination, but I go to a synagogue. I have a rabbi. He's way smarter than me. He knows way more than me. I ask him questions. Like, it's a life pursuit, right? It was like I did it. Why not get the final, right? So I don't practice at all. Never have. But that studiousness comes along with it. So often, not always, but like today I was just not in the mood of reading a book, but I was listening to a podcast on history. But like often I will learn Talmud on the bus or the subway. I carry around a book. It's in my bag right now, right here. A book of Talmud. And I just read. It's Jewish intellectualism. Right, it's fascinating stuff, a lot of stuff that's totally inapplicable today, but it's just fascinating, interesting stuff, and it really is mentally stimulating in many ways, mentally confusing as hell too. But that's part of our culture. That's normal. Like within my group, people study constantly. Like study, that's just a thing, and that's sort of like a child rearing, and that's why I say like this insular community. That's part of the community aspect. That's not a unique thing within my community. There's tons of people who do that every day.
What does it teach you?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think that good religion, that is religion practiced in a positive way, and is an extraordinarily good thing, regardless of belief. I'm not encouraging any belief one way or another. What I'm saying is the idea of religion creates rigors and controls on your life. Like, for example, the codes of Jewish law. There's 2 major codes of Jewish law, one written by, French Germanic scholar in, the 1400s, and one written by a Moroccan North African scholar. So they have slight disagreements. Those codes of Jewish law literally start with, when you wake up in the morning, there's a law. How you wake up, right? Like, you go like, so is it necessary? I don't know. I'm not going to think about that. Some people will think about those ideas and like, what's the purpose? And you can that's fair game. Or you can sit there and go like, hey, it doesn't matter. If it tells you wake up in the morning, it doesn't say wake up in the morning and look at your iPhone. It says wake up in the morning and be grateful that you're alive. You're like, that's awesome, right? Like, regardless of religion or perspective, right? To wake up in the morning and feel grateful, that's an amazing thing. So how can that be a negative, right? It practiced in that way, it does give your life uniformity and structure to it. And so there's that, right? There's also just intellectualism, like ideas and breadth of ideas. And the fact that like Talmud, for example, Jewish Talmud, I don't want to get into it for here, it's for a different topic, but it's debates that have occurred over a 500-year period, and they put it down on paper. And these great debates about concepts. And you have to I sit there a lot and think back, like, what are they're debating over, if someone stole someone's ox. Well, but what are they really getting at? It's not about the ox. It's about an idea, right? Someone took something from somebody, whatever that is, something of value, something of commercial value, something that you do your work with, right? Whatever that may be. And so you have to figure that out, and you go, and what are they really arguing about? What's really their nuance arguments? And that's kind of a lot what Talmud is. And it gives you a lot of thoughtfulness to things.
I mean, now I want to ask you, how do you wake up in the morning?
Pissed off. I usually get kicked in the nuts by one of my kids. That's kind of how I wake up in the morning. No, I wake up, I wake up in an alarm clock, and we say this prayer in the morning when you wake up. I will always tell my kid, when I wake him up, say it. It's a short prayer. Thank you, God, for giving me back my soul, kind of thing. But again, the content is less important, in my opinion, than the idea. Right? The idea is expressing gratitude for something, and that's how you're getting up in the morning. It's a positive way.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your parenting. I mean, you're a dad, 5 kids, yeah?
That's so wrong.
If you don't feel comfortable with
No, I do feel comfortable. It's just like I'm a terrible parent.
No.
I think I'm a terrible parent. Okay. My parents were very tough people, right? And a lot of us have experienced that, like tough parents who came from, I don't know, my parents are born just after World War II, sort of Jews, which they were very tough. And on top of you, and maybe lacked and had too many kids. I'm one of 8, right? And so I took the exact opposite approach, but it's turned out terrible, I think, in my opinion. Like, my kids say to me sometimes, they go, Dad, you scream at us a lot. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I think it's just I have a loud voice, and sometimes you just scream across the house, but I'm like, I don't make my kids do chores. I come every night to my kid. Like, I have my daughter, I have a 17-year-old daughter who, when she comes home, she just locks herself in her room, just watching TikTok or something. So occasionally I'll FaceTime her from outside her room. Hey, sweetie, what's going on? I miss you. I'd like to chat. And she's more susceptible to talking on FaceTime is what I realized.
To meet her where she's at.
Yeah. So I'll just FaceTime her. I'm sitting outside her room, and I'm just talking to her like on the front stoop, like I'm 10 feet away from her room. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a particular parenting style. With the youngest, my wife and I engage in what's called conscious discipline. And so it's very much engaging with him. Like, he drew something, right? We were playing last night, he drew a picture, and you just drew a square. That's really, really, how did you make that square? What color is that square? What are you drawing? And you're very engaging with him, and he's very engaging back. So he's my great hope.
Took you 4 to learn that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's funny. I mean, I kind of feel like going back a little bit to, how you are as a teacher, how you are as a person. Like I said, that's why you're so engaging in classes, because you're honest about these things. One of the things that I wanted to do is I have a few of your Rate My Professor reviews.
Oh, no.
Written down here. I won't go through all of them.
Okay.
Among my favorites, Benny's the man.
Yes, that's factually true.
That you are a man. And these are all kind of...
I think, no, not a. It says the. Benny is a man.
Can you be both?
Yes, I'm both. And the man. Okay. It could be a negative, right? One time I was on social media and I was having an argument. My buddy Danny. I have a buddy Danny who's very, very funny. And he has friends from all walks of life. Very interesting character. So we were talking, there was this discussion talking about narcotics and criminal justice system. And there was a guy who was commenting who didn't know me, a friend of Danny's, but like much more on the left than I am. And he was writing about how, drugs should be legalized and blah, blah. And I was writing I was citing California law on certain things. And I kept going back and forth with him. And I was like, you're kind of wrong on your perspective. We're not incarcerating. We're giving people rehabilitation and all these things. And I kept citing the laws. And finally he wrote at the end of it, he's like, okay, he didn't know who I was. He just, clearly you know what you're talking about, right? It was a respectful discussion. He wrote, clearly you know what you're talking about, but there's a difference between, the law, how you're interpreting it, and when you tangle with the machine. It's totally different. And I wrote back in all caps, I am the machine. And that shut it down, right?
That shut it down.
Yeah.
Right, so one of your other comments, my only qualm is that he does have a propensity to go on unnecessary tangents.
Yeah. I take that as a compliment, I think. It's necessary. I teach a 4-hour class. I'm very cognizant of it. I teach a 4-hour class, sometimes dull stuff. And so I try to constantly gauge students to me and how students are reacting and how attentive they are and how engaged they are with the materials. And if I see they're not, I'm just going to go off. Right? Because I need to bring them back. Right? And that sometimes happens. So different classes have different sort of attentiveness, requires different sort of tangents. But yeah, I do that. Another thing I learned, and this is from the Talmud, there's a great Talmudic teacher who always said he started every class with a joke. That's how you start every class, because you get people warmed up. And I always start. I never jump in the material right away. I always start off with how you guys doing. Where I'll ask something. I'll get the students engaged with me. I'll ask them about their vacations, whatever. Because I want to start them off. They're warmed up, and so that's part of it. But yeah, I go on necessary tangents all the time. It's part of my scatological sort of brain.
It's the way you think. And kind of related to the next point. One is that he isn't afraid to speak his mind. That's something that I really personally related to. And I mean, it's true, right? But I think that's one of the most valuable things that you do as a professor, is you really don't have that
filter.
You don't have that filter, which, for better or for worse. But in a lot of ways, that is one of the most...
Well, so here's the tray. So talking about, we're on a podcast, right? I've had multiple people say, do a podcast. Now, several things. One, I'm not arrogant enough to think I have enough information to share with the world. I really am not. And unfortunately, there's too many podcasters who think, that's not disrespectful to you. This is awesome. Okay. So I'm not arrogant enough to think I have information that I'm going to give over to the world. Second of all, I recognize, I'm inevitably going to step in it. And we're so quick to judge today in our universe. And that's kind of what brought me out in that sense, to be open with my students. We've lost that perspective of academic environment. Let's figure it out. Let's bring up weird shit. Let's try to figure out, there's a line, I get that. Can't get too weird, but there's a point where people do have to say, we're in college, we're here to learn, we're here to figure. I didn't know what I was when I was in college, one way or another in anything, right? I had no idea. And even in law school, I had no idea, what my perspective might be on any social, political, human issue. That does require analysis and learning and peer engagement and professor engagement. And certainly when you're a professor, you talk to your students, right? You're the authority talking, for lack of a better word, talking down to them, and they're engaging as opposed to them teaching you. But there's also that value to me as well, where students can teach me a perspective, an idea. And we've lost that. Your generation, in my opinion, has completely lost that. The ability to discuss social topics in a mature way, right? Let's talk about it, whatever it is. Let's talk about it. Let's try to see the different sides. I do that with my kids a lot. I really, they'll ask me, how are you voting? And I never, ever tell them. I've been criticized for that, by the way. And I don't tell them. And I tell them, what is it that you care about? What do you think's important? What do you think these people are? Let's talk about them. And I always try to give the other side, regardless of whether I believe in it or not. I try to go, here's what the other perspective is, so they'll have a more balanced perspective on it. And I think that's necessary. I think that's now. I was told by a friend. He told me, well, that's totally wrong. You're evil. And I was like, what are you talking about? I try to give my well balanced. I want to give them information. He goes, there's literally a Nazi running in our U.S. presidency, and you're not going to tell them to vote against him. Right, it was 2016. And I was like, well, how the fuck do you deal with that? Right? Well, if you limit the parameters of speech and discussion and ideas to Nazi or not, then we have no ideas, right? I disagree with that fundamentally. And there might be people watch this who say, well, I disagree with Professor Ford completely. But I think that's a good thing. That's what we need in society, is the idea to vet ideas and perspectives and ideologies and theories. And not everything I disagree with is evil or wrong, right? And that's where I really feel there's a human tragedy and all that. And as a professor, I've tried to take on. I'm going to try to be as honest as I can with my students. To the extent I could discuss a topic, I will. And I think I do a good job, I hope, of presenting certain, even controversial topics in a balanced way without giving too much of my personal perspective in it. It will happen, inevitably. But you try to avoid giving your personal, because it's not about me. It's not about what my perspective is. It's about what the ideas are that exist in the universe that you can think through and come up with your own perspective. That's fine, as long as thought through. If you don't know the other side and you go, I disagree with it, you have no right to disagree.
What do you think has caused this? Why is our generation like this?
A lot of things. We can talk about this for hours. I don't know. Social media, the pervasiveness of political engagement, which has been, I think, devastating to youth. I literally had no idea what a Republican was or a Democrat was. When I was a teenager, I had no idea. What are you talking about? I'm playing baseball, right? And this insistence. There's a lot of social groups that insist that you do know. And people out there go, you must know, otherwise you are, and this sort of labeling of people. I asked some students years ago, I said, what's your biggest fear in life? And almost unanimously, the biggest fear was being canceled. And I was like, what the? Are you kidding me? It used to be public speaking, right? It used to be like falling off a cliff, drowning. I don't know. Like now it's fear of being canceled. That means you literally can't vet an idea. Like I think historically we always recognize that when I teach a case like Judge Brandeis in 1928, in a dissent, talking about how what was once whispered in closets is now, screamed from rooftops. Like he wrote that in 1890. You sit there and go like, what does that mean? What's whispered in closets now screamed from rooftop? Like your information is exposed. Who cares? If I'm whispering only appropriate things in a closet, then who cares if it's screamed from roof? The point is that people do. People have friend groups. People should have the freedom to talk, to act like morons, to be stupid, to be loose, to say stupid shit. It should never reflect in your actions, right? But the point is, that's helpful towards understanding what you do and how you believe and how you engage and also to your humanity. You learn from that, right? If you never got smacked down, and I don't mean canceled, I mean smacked down for doing an inappropriate thinking, inappropriate acting, in an inappropriate way, you'll never learn, right? From that experience, you get that curse to you, and you're like, yeah, I was a dick, or I was inappropriate, or whatever. And again, not criminal inappropriate. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about horrible actions. We're talking about just natural humanity that's natural to people, natural to youth, natural to freedom youth, right? We're in a free country. We engage. We do dumb shit in college. Everybody did. Right, and so I think that is an important aspect. I once met a Singaporean lawyer, now a judge in Singapore. Her sister lives here in LA, and we were having a conversation. And we were talking about, I was like, yeah, I'm a criminal prosecutor. And I was explaining how, like, we don't prosecute weed. This is years and years ago. I was like, it's kind of dumb. I was like, in Singapore, if you get caught with a roach, you can get like a year in prison, a bit more than that's like the death penalty. And she like vehemently disagreed with me. And the next day she saw my older brother and she's like, yeah, I had dinner with your brother Benny. He's such a liberal. And I'm like, that's hysterical. In that area that works. That doesn't work. That social experiment doesn't work. At least that's my opinion. Cannot work in the United States. It can't work in a large location. Very small location, very controlled location. It's phenomenal, right? A conservative parent wanting to raise their kids properly, living in Singapore must be heaven, right? But like, it's not. It doesn't work. Right? If we don't let youth experiment or learn.
So you think this is specific to the United States?
No, I think specific to westernized ideologies. Right? What was Singaporean thing? Like I had a student once from Dubai. We were talking, wonderful kid. He was a great kid. He drove a beautiful Porsche. He was handsome. He was 6'2". He was a handsome guy. He drove a Porsche. And one day we're walking in class and he looks at me and goes, I disagree with American democracy. And I said, well, what do you think is better? He goes, well, the way we work in Dubai. And I go, that's because you're part of the ruling class. Ask the 90% who aren't in the ruling class how they feel about that, right? Like, so that's kind of the interesting thing. It's always a work in progress, right? Any system of government will always be a work in progress, and always need amendments, and always need upgrades, and always need new perspectives. But certain things will work in small areas. The kibbutz in Israel worked as a communist commune. It hasn't proven to have worked on a grand scale, right? And so that sort of thing. Things that might work in a small setting might not work in a larger setting. We need that freedom. I believe that very much.
I wanted to kind of
off topic.
Put something out. No, it was good. And I want to put a suggestion out here, and I want you to correct me or share your thoughts on this. But,
okay.
And I've had a lot of thoughts, being part of this generation, being kind of a chronically online kid, right? Like I was one of those kids who was going onto the internet, exploring it as there were not really a lot of rules, as I was kind of engaging with those. Something that I think is so interesting about my generation in particular, but also as it's spreading to older generations, is that the internet kind of develops its own kind of government. For once, we have this digital world that connects people across the country, across countries, multiple, and there's, I think, a huge pressure to create that kind of online identity. I think that's something that really, erupted in 2020, erupted in 2021 as people started to use it more as an activist, but it's always been something online. It's that idea that you can go online and create your own identity, create your own persona, and that's something that you can reflect to people, whether that's positive or positive or negative, whether it's true to yourself or completely distant to yourself. And I think in a way, as we use that as another form of socialization, as a way of something to actually say, this is an impression that you want to give to people, that there is that pressure to conform to certain ideologies. There is that pressure to put on a persona or a face that is aligned with something or says something about what your morals and your ethics are. And from personal experience, I can say that that does impact the way that you really feel. It does impact the way that you really engage with people offline, because you do have that kind of similar pressure.
So, okay, so it's very interesting. That's a very interesting point, and it's a pressure point that your generation experiences that no prior generation has ever experienced. The what were they called? The people who were anti-machines in the early days of the machines. You know what I'm saying? Like in Europe,
Yeah.
what were they called? I forget what they're called. There was a terminology for it.
What decade
Right?
would that have been?
There were people. I'm sure there were people who were anti-cars, right? And so, like anything, there's people who are against like that. The internet has brought amazing ability for the voiceless to have a voice. I believe that I used it in that way way before 2020. I was using this in 2010, exposing voices, and that's another chapter we talked about in class a little bit, but exposing victims of abuse who are able of giving them a voice and giving them the ability to talk and connect the world and sort of hold people accountable. It gave us that, right? Where previously people were powerless and limited in their ability to just get information out. It was limited by whatever universe you were in. So the internet's amazing in that way. And it's given amazing. I mean, besides the fact that I think the internet is astonishing in the wealth of information you have at the fingertips. It's unbelievable, right? There's no longer like, hey, what is X, right? Like you can look it up, right? Whatever question you guys are like, let's Google it, right? You just Google. So that's amazing. But with that always brings negatives too. The negativity is on several. One is that you have curated personalities, right? And that doesn't allow a person to shine. Like, it used to be like people got on early days in the internet, I don't know, on Twitter and social media, whatever, and said stupid shit. Okay. Inappropriate, racist, disgusting, whatever, right? That has happened. And they get called out. Like I've seen some people getting called out as adults, and you're like, wait a minute. Let them grow up. Like if a kid committed a robbery at gunpoint at 14 years old, we wouldn't bring that up, would we? It gets sealed record, even if he gets convicted. Like we're bringing up someone's tweet. Like we have to let people grow and learn and experience and that sort of stuff, and even experience a bit of a backlash, but without the backlash meaning you're the worst human being in the world. And then what has happened? We've seen that so many times, repeatedly. Your generation creates this carefully curated image of an individual. It's not really reflective of who you are. It could be unbelievably frustrating. Probably leads to great amount of depression and drugs and mental illness because you're a facade. You're not. No one's real. No one's real online in their representations and the things they endorse. Like no one really knows, understands, cares to understand even. You've also lost the ability of researching. You just read a headline, you read a TikTok, and so those are the negatives. There's another negative. It's like actual lunatics have a voice to yell and scream any number of things, and there's any number of other lunatics who are willing to follow that carefully and engage with that and subscribe to that belief system. And so you're like, we're giving, normally it would just be some guy screaming on a street corner. And now it's all of a sudden a person screaming on a street corner with 1 million people listening to him. So there is always attendant dangers associated with any like sort of new development, new social development, where I like that's imagine we're going to come to a time, I don't know, I can't predict the future. I'm not Jules Verne or anything like that. I couldn't predict the iPhone, but it is not inconceivable to think of like the Google Glass or whatever they're developing now, the Apple, that we would be able to see a social credit score on an individual. How many followers do they have on any platform? How important are they? And you're like, now we're going to gauge people by this completely substandard standard, right, in life. And that's the terrifying thing, is like, I wish your generation got control of themselves. And I don't know how. I have no solution. I've just complained. That's my thing. But like, I really wish it was, right? I really wish we just sat there and said, enough's enough of this. Like, there's a value. There's a huge value to communications, to people connecting. But when those communications become so stifled, because any text message I send might get revealed to the public as the worst thing ever said in human history, right? Or those relationships are so fake. That's a negative. It doesn't help you out. That's why you do see people leaving social media completely, and they're like, I'm much happier. And why? Because they're not seeing the garbage out there that people are self-promoting or whatever it is.
You may not be able to tell the future, but you do have this incredible insight, and that's something that we talked a little bit about in your class. Is you would tell us, the early days of being an early lawyer, watching new technologies actually come out and disrupt the way that people live their lives. I mean, again, from personal experience, I've had that experience. I've been old enough now that I've gone through different phones. I've gone through AI. I've considered all these different ways in which technology will change the way that we engage with society. And for you in particular, you had that experience watching how technology changes law, changes criminality. Can you tell me a little bit more about that evolution, what you've learned, what you've grown to fear?
So that's a great question, and that could be, right, again, that should be the subject of okay, I could talk for hours about this sort of stuff, but I guess I'm living in real time, but we all will, I think, live in real time, this evolution. Okay, in the early days of a lot of things, like the early days of hacking, it was prankster. Right, it was prankster. There was the phone freaks in this 1960s. I don't know if you know. Steve Jobs was a phone freak. They figured out ways to manipulate and get long distance calls for free. Okay, whatever. It was like prankster shit. It was not really. And then people realized I can make a lot of money off this, right? And so the use of technology has evolved immensely in that way. People going from, hey, this is fun, let's screw around with these tools, to I can shut down companies. I can hold companies hostage. I can hold society hostage. I can explore this. I can explore that. And so we're seeing that more and more, the use of technology in the commission of actual crime, or to use as a crime. And that's an amazingly fascinating thing. America's gold mine. Like, we talk about the gold rushes, you think back in the day, imagine being in San Francisco in 1949, we'd find nuggets of gold, we'd get rich. America is today's gold mine. It literally is a huge gold mine. And foreign, not just Americans, and foreigners as well, coming into America physically or digitally to take that wealth, that we can, it's amazing to me. Like, I sit there and go, we can tolerate that and still continue as if nothing happened. I mean, that's an amazing statement of the wealth of nation that we built and grew. But there really are. I've dealt with so many foreign actors coming into the United States and just stealing because it's that easy. And so that's one of the things, that's the horizon, right? The horizon is just, how can I monetize everything I do, right? From what it used to be, I want a credit card. I want to steal your credit card. Why? I can go buy myself a new suit and a cool, record. Today, it's like, why would I get that? I can make millions of dollars stealing your identities, right? Like, I'm going to monetize it, and it's a full-time job. We have full-time jobs, 9 to 5, weekends, they're committing fraud, right? There's that aspect. The other aspect is the use of technology in the commission of crimes, right? There's very few crimes that occur without some technological involvement in it. Whatever crime, even the physical crimes, a person will have their cell phone in their pocket while committing X crime. A person might make a phone call to a colleague while or after or before committing X crime. And all those things give us information about a person. So technology and the advancement of technology is a boon for law enforcement. We've created a lot of laws. I think there's a lot of restrictive laws on how law enforcement engages with that. But I think that's positive, meaning say, we need that balance. We want good law enforcement, right? We want law enforcement to solve crime and to hold people who commit crime accountable. I think that's a generally good statement of a healthy society. We also want government to be restricted in their ability to obtain information about citizens, innocuous or not. Right? And if they're going to get information about citizens, there has to be these rigid guidelines and rules that limit them in their scope and their ability, because they will always go overboard. Government will always go overboard if you give them enough rope, right? They'll always go further. So you have to create limitations on them and boundaries within a range of logic, balancing those interests. Government's role of protecting society, of holding those accountable who commit crimes, and the role of society of having freedom and free speech and not stifling free speech or stifling freedom. And so we want to have those balance, and that's necessary to have these really good, robust laws in that. Just to give you an idea, and I find it fascinating because the politics of this, just when politics gets involved, it screws up everything, right? So you sit there and say, let's just make a blanket stupid statement. Conservatives are more police friendly than liberals. Okay, they like more police. Liberals want left. Now that's, I know, extraordinary generalization. Okay, and that may be true, and we kind of see that today as it's going, how limiting police powers come from one side and growing police powers come from the other side. But yet so that would be a political statement. Then you have, like, I was reading just yesterday, the Republican-led House committee on whatever is investigating police or government purchasing of consumer data. Now, why are they doing that? Well, the Jim Jordan Republicans, Jim Jordan's a congressman who never wears a jacket. He always wears a tie in his shirt, like I am. Jim Jordan, he believes that the FBI, his theory is the FBI and government agencies have been weaponized against conservatives. And so he wants to shut that down. It's so weird because if you the politics get so intertwined and weird here. So you have one side now, the left, saying, hey, we want them to be able to investigate this more. And you have the right going, no, we want less. And then you've flipped roles. But what's going on nowadays, like, we have created some limitations. Maybe we need a more comprehensive reform. There's subject Oren Kerr, who's the greatest cyber professor in the world. He's just written a book about this. And it's in publication about this idea, and he certainly thinks we need more regulation. He's right. I wouldn't disagree with him. But on the flip side, we have like the conservatives in Congress going, there's restrictions on the government. So what does the government do if they can't get your data? You know who could get your data if not the government? Well, a lot of other people.
Companies, private businesses.
Private businesses have tons of data, and what's the limitation on their data? Well, there's limits in how the government obtains it, but they sell your data. There's massive data brokers that exist today who possess tons of data about you.
It's funny, actually.
Now, if the government goes ahead and buys that from the data broker, they don't need a search warrant.
And governments are just allowed to just
because they're purchasing it. It's available for purchase.
So I just had this experience on kind of this nonprofit that I'm working on. We are trying to run ads on Facebook, and it was my first time ever going into like the business ad suite, looking how you can tailor that. And one of the things you can do is actually select what demographics of people you want to, and it gets incredibly specific. And it's something that, unless you're a business person actually trying to go into, you don't really understand. They have people who, they can tell, if you divorced, if you're long distance, if you went out on a dating app in the last few weeks and you understood these things. These are just data brokerages that you can purchase from any entity.
So they're collecting and they're purchasing. And so there are data brokerages who have billions, trillions, because I don't know, whatever number of data points about anything. And because, whatever those social media platforms are or organizations, that's the value of collecting data, aside from being able to directly market to you, right? Facebook uses data collection to enable businesses on Facebook to engage with its audiences. And that's, I guess, a positive in a way, and we could also criticize it. They also have that data that they're getting across different platforms. Maybe they're selling it, maybe people are purchasing it, and they have all these data points. They're unsearchable data points, but they are searchable. I mean, say no physical human being can go through all of it, but they are searchable in the sense that governments can use it in different ways. And why wouldn't they buy it? It's available for sale. So if our government could buy it, who else is buying it?
I want to ask, because it seems like this problem is huge, right? I mean,
yes.
Problem, in quotes. What should how concerned should the average person be about this? Is this something that, we should start reading our terms of agreement? We should start doing something, or is it something
It's a really tough question, and sorry to interrupt, it's a tough question because I don't know the answer. I recognize the existential threat to humanity by the amount of data that's collected and the amount of things that your government or foreign governments or foreign actors have on you, or national actors. Those are negatives. The data collection to the average individual is ultimately a negative. It can control so many aspects of our existence. And it is a matter of control, right? But that is to say, how you're preached to, what information you're exposed to, how you're limited. I think that's that danger to the idea of democracy in general. The flip side is those things that we utilize are vastly important to our existence, right? Like Google's collecting every data point on you. But can you not use Google or a search engine? Right now, there are search engines that say we don't collect every data point, and then there are things around that you have to go through this whole rigmarole in your day-to-day life. You're just a regular person, just want to live a simple life. You're like, I don't have time to start getting this app and that app and covering and getting special VPNs on my devices and all that, so that nobody can ever track me, collect data points, or whatever it is. We can't live like that, and they know that. So yes, there's a percentage of people who live like that, right? There's a percentage of people at bomb shelters and storing food away. There's a percentage of people who have that. But for most of us, we don't. And we're not going to. I mean, data point number one, get off everything. I have a friend who's off everything, okay? So you can't collect any information about me. But we all recognize that's like, I can get rid of my refrigerator, I guess, and store food in the backyard, but like that's not a practical way of living. We're all living like this. So I don't have a solution. I'm saying there is ways, maybe minimize your exposure in certain things, but again, it's the way we're chilled in certain ways, right? If you do a Google search, I don't know, whatever. So think of some radical Google search that you might do, not a normal one. And that's a data point that's collected. And then how could that be used? In what way could it be used against you, right? That's kind of scary, right?
And I mean, you point out those benefits. I mean, those kind of positive sides. At any point, you could just stop doing this, but a lot of people don't want to. And the point is, practical. You don't want. In many ways, you don't want to have it be just a completely blank script about you. There's a reason why they collect this data, and it is, something that can be revolutionized against you. But when I open up my Instagram feed, I do want to see the cooking videos that I'm interested in. I want to see the different cuisines that I'm interested in.
So even putting that aside, what I'm saying is even putting aside social media, that's the easiest part of it to get off, right? Like that's to me the easiest part. We could get off social media and be fine. The harder part is getting off your cell phone, right? Which is say, whether it's a Google search, having an email account, having whatever types of accounts that you might have on anything, right? Those are all data points. Everything you're doing, having information transmitted from your car is a data point. Where you're driving, where you're going to, those are all data points being collected by companies, and then eventually sold and aggregated. So that's the much harder, right? I can sit there and go, I'm going to get off social media. I'm still giving up millions of data points all the time. Right, that's the more difficult thing. You can't sit there and say, "Don't drive, don't use." I have a tap card. Take the bus. It's on my phone. Right now, there's a data point about me. Ubers, there's data points about you. Anything you do, you play a video game, there's data points about you. Right, every single thing you do, it's not practical. It's very, very hard in our modern world for a person to live off grid. Right, there are a few, but it's not a practical thing, and that's where government regulation of certain things might come in, but I think it's going to be very hard for government to regulate data brokers, because the freeness of everything that we use loses its free value, right? Remember the early days of like Amazon, Jeff Bezos being interviewed on a talk show, or the early days of Facebook, and they were losing money. Jeff Bezos, we lost $2 billion last year. They're like, well, how do you make money? Like, how are you going to make money on this website? Right? It's data. Right? Facebook was always free. They're like, how are you making money? Well, we're going to put ads. You're like, really? You're going to make enough money to support this platform? Yeah, really. And that's the point of it all, right? Like, data is that important. It's the most important thing. Again, even if used for non-nefarious purposes, innocent purposes, just marketing purposes, it's still data collection about everything about your existence, right? Everything about you.
Yeah. I think, and I am just kind of editorializing a little bit here, but I've always thought that there's something a little bit sad about that. It's the idea that we are free, that we can go out and do whatever we want in the world. We have choices that we can make. I could get up and I could leave this room right now, but that is still tracked in some way. The choices that I'm making are still being tracked. They're still building, not they, that third person, but in a way that impression is going to be made somewhere. And that we could realistically go back and look at what I was doing. I could look back at my phone and see exactly what I was doing to the minute 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 5 months ago, 6 years ago. I don't know. It's odd. And
so we're doomsayers here, I think.
So maybe we're doomsaying.
yeah, but we are, because there is a point in time that will occur, right? That's the fear of what we do. Like, it used to be like in the early days of the DA's office, they'd be like, yeah, you just show them the paper, right? As paper dog. Like, today it's the mass amount of data we have to deal with is unmanageable. We're far behind in that way.
Is it overwhelming sometimes?
We have undigestible amounts of data. We don't have robust systems for that. And those systems to digest data, right, that you might collect, cost exponential amount of money that society wouldn't want to give to the DA's office to invest, right? Like, there is always that balance of government spending and all that. So we have this sort of like triage system in many cases, right? Imagine, I know cases that have had 50, 100 terabytes worth of data. How do you go through that, right? Like, how do you deal with that? So there maybe are some working groups on this. I think we're far from the solution in that way. But yeah, we miss data points all the time on criminals. Meanwhile, the data brokers are collecting on innocent individuals, right? And it is the nature of how much we do limit law enforcement, as we should. I'm not advocating for them that they should get more. They should get less access, and they should be regulated and highly oversight, a lot of oversight. But I think we need to start doing that also in other ways.
Yeah. And I mean, as doomsaying as it is, it is encouraging speaking with you as lawyers.
You
who
took
actually
away all my
cares about
funny.
these things. I took away your funny?
Yeah.
I know, I got a little
serious stuff. Okay,
well,
sorry, continue.
I mean, I did want to point, there is like an uplifting note to that, is that we can reasonably have these conversations. We don't live in a country in which, we are just kind of victims to these, that this is happening, we don't really have a say in it. We do live in a country where there is a system in place that we're seeing Apple, we're seeing Google on trial right now. These are things that if people, have concerns about it, there's a way in sorts that we
Hopefully,
can kind of, hopefully, we like to imagine. And I have to say that is something that you taught me in particular with our class, is I felt very strongly, I was like, are we headed downhill? Do we even have the brakes to put on this? But there is something kind of uplifting about that American system, is that if you want to litigate, you can probably litigate. There is a pathway to that.
Yeah, and there always should be, right? Like, we need that. We need robust ideas and laws to enable us to do that without making everything politicized. Then when it gets politicized, it then becomes good versus evil for whatever side you're on, right? You're conservative, this is good and that's evil. If you're liberal, this is good and that's evil. That's the over-politicization of everything is what drives me absolutely bananas. Like, that's the one thing that I'm like, we can't overly politicize stuff. We have to have ideas. And that's what suppresses speech. Right? Government, get the fuck out of my classroom. No, I mean, that sort of idea. Okay. So that came out wrong. I apologize.
Thank you. I don't know. It's just that idea of kind of America as a country and the freedoms that we have to live in. I feel like I've resonated with very strongly in a lot of the legal conversations that we've had, is that there is still that ability to kind of pursue that American dream, is that we do live in a country, for better or for worse, as things become politicized, as, there is the argument that a lot of things just are inherently political. We just still live in a country where everybody's entitled to have that opinion.
Yeah, and we can have hopefully robust discussion and legal discussion too.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm with you on that.
Well, I feel like this was a pretty robust legal discussion.
Yeah.
I wanted to say thank you. Is there anything else that you just really want to yap about right now?
No, I don't know. You can ask me anything. I yap about anything, as you know. But no, it was awesome. Thank you, Sophie. This was fantastic.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
I enjoyed this. Yeah.
My only other note is your sushi. I've been really wanting to try making sushi at home, and I just don't know how to start.
Well, do you want me tips for the viewers?
I kind of do want tips.
My Japanese
to bring the fun
friend
back.
who's I'm a godparent of her son. Okay, so this is what I do. Okay, so now I'm getting serious. I go to the Korean market downtown, Little Tokyo Marketplace. I'm doing not a sponsor. So I go to a Korean Japanese marketplace and buy some fresh sushi grade fish. I prefer salmon.
Okay.
Because it's cheaper and also easier to deal with. There's an upper limit to salmon, right? Whereas good tuna, you can't ever cut it the way a good sushi chef will do it, right? Salmon you could. But you have to make the rice, right? The sushi rice, and be able to make good sushi rice. That's obviously, so sushi grade rice.
A rice cooker?
No, my wife broke our rice cooker, but I can still cook it in the pot, but it doesn't come out as good. But if you take rice and rice cooker, then sushi requires the mixture of sugar and salt and rice vinegar. So there's a recipe for that. You put that in. Korean friend who owned a sushi restaurant gave me a tip. Put in a little sake as well into your sushi rice and mix that up. Okay, you just nicely slice your salmon, and then what do you want to put along with it? So lately I've been doing this thing where I'll take onions, thinly slice them, put them in a bowl, squeeze some sort of citrus, whatever it is, orange, lemon, lime, whatever, or all three, ponzu sauce and some soy sauce and sugar, and let that sit. Mix it and let it sit, and you just kind of extract the sweetness of the onions, and then you kind of have to have a dipping sauce. And then I make vegetables in different ways. You slice them and you make them in different ways. I've sometimes marinated in miso, sometimes in gochujang, whatever it is. But today, the lazy way to do it is basically I just cut up my vegetables, put them in a bucket, some sugar, salt, white vinegar, and a bunch of water. Because I don't want it too vinegary. I just want it slightly pickled. And a bunch of water, let's say for half an hour, drain it, wash it off, boom, you have beautiful pickled vegetables. Take a plate, pile up a pile of rice, cut up your salmon, nice thin slices, pile of vegetables, maybe fresh avocado. If you have pomegranate, throw in pomegranate seeds, sesame seeds if you got them, thinly sliced green onion. If you want to fry up some garlic or something, you can have garlic chips on top. And the seaweed pack. You buy a small seaweed pack, right? Not the big seaweeds. You get the seaweed packs, the flavored seaweeds, right? That are really yummy and salty. And you just have handheld. You just make individual tacos. And that's how you eat it.
I like that.
That's my sushi recipe.
This is how you
is how I roll.
de-stress after your day.
This is Friday. This is Friday evening for 15 years.
This is every Friday.
Every single Friday for over 15 years. This is what I do.
Now, like, do you give your kids this recipe? Or
Yeah. No, they can participate. No, it's for them. It's for the whole family.
They're allowed to participate.
So I make it, and I try to get a 40, like a big beer. And while I'm making my food, I'm drinking my drink. It's Friday afternoon after work. We're all done. And we're going to sit down. We're going to have sushi dinner. That's what's for dinner every Friday night.
Life of a DA.
Life of DA. A beer and some salmon.
A beer and some salmon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Benny. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It was an
Thank
honor
you,
to
Sophie.
speak. From Studio A at the USC Annenberg School, this has been Sophie Sullivan, your host of the Paradigm Podcast. Check us out on YouTube and Spotify at the Paradigm Podcast. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.